How's it going, you guys? So in this video I want to go over the very basic foundational things that you want to pay attention to be sure that you're actually healthy, okay? And I'm going to define healthy after I talk about the indicators you want to pay attention to be sure you're healthy. But most people, especially that are looking at internet info on how to be healthy online, they are chasing a fantasyland idea of health that doesn't exist. And therefore, they're constantly seeking without ever getting any satisfaction from an answer. So defining health is very important, because if we don't know what goal we're chasing, we're never going to be able to reach it. Defining health is very important for achieving health, obviously. But first of all, hemoglobin A1C, okay, HA1C, that is the first thing, okay. You want your hemoglobin A1C in the lower end of the healthy range. That's the first thing. That is a direct indicator of your insulin sensitivity, but more so your blood sugar control. Okay. Fasting insulin is a way better predictor, but most physicians don't test for that. But fasting insulin can predict diabetes over 10 years before it ever happens. Your hemoglobin A1C doesn't start to go off the charts until you've already lost insulin sensitivity. And so taking a fasting insulin test is the best direct test for predicting that. So insulin sensitivity would really be the first thing. If you can get a fasting insulin test, fasting insulin. If you can get a fasting insulin test, that would be even better. But hemoglobin A1C is the most basic test that most people have available. And so making sure hemoglobin A1C is in the bottom of the healthy range to be sure that your blood sugar is in check. Because after over 8 years now of being deep in this health space, I mean, how long has it been? Since 2012, really. I have found time and time again that most diseases are either directly or indirectly caused by insulin resistance, especially most of the ones that people are dying from the most. So everything from type 2 diabetes to cancer to heart disease, they all seem to be caused by insulin resistance. And the fact is, you don't even have to take a dogmatic approach to restoring insulin sensitivity. There are many different ways of doing so. There are certain ways that I advocate, but I don't even want to go into that. No matter what, make sure your hemoglobin A1C is on check. Take a fasting insulin test, even better. Get both of them if you can. That is the first thing. The second thing, and these are all easily available blood markers. I'm not going into anything crazy or abstract. I just want to make things very simple for people, because I have found that it's not necessary to go crazy with these hair analysis tests and shit like that. Most people can be extremely healthy just paying attention to these things. So that's the first thing, the hemoglobin A1C. The second thing is triglycerides. Triglycerides are going to be generally a direct reflection of your hemoglobin A1C. Triglycerides typically are a direct reflection of the amount of carbohydrates you eat and the type of carbohydrates you eat in your diet, relative to your exercise frequency and volume throughout the week. So the more carbohydrates you eat relative to your exercise, a lot of times the higher your triglycerides. So triglycerides is a measure of the fat in your blood, okay? And so, a lot of times caloric excess in general can cause a higher production of triglycerides in the blood, but it's mostly from polyunsaturated omega-6 fats and high glycemic load carbohydrates, okay? So exercise, basically over time, depending on the volume and your current fitness level and your current body fat percentage and things like that, you can think of exercise as burning up some of these triglycerides for energy. Now, this is not always the case, and if you're eating an extremely high carbohydrate diet, your body's going to utilize the glucose and the carbohydrates first, but the more carbs you eat, the more of energy your body's going to have. And if you're not burning up all that usable carbohydrate fuel, then it'll start to produce triglycerides, kind of like as an overflow, if that makes sense. And so you got to be burning up those carbs, and you got to be burning up the triglycerides in your blood, otherwise they'll spill over. So you can think of high triglycerides and basically high hemoglobin A1C as a result of energy overflow. Too much energy coming in, not enough energy being expended, okay? And for me, I see this as mostly a too much carbohydrate issue relative to your exercise. And if you look at, even some basic mainstream medicine articles, they'll say the same thing. Typically, is that high triglycerides has a lot to do with the glycemic load of your diet in general. So triglycerides and hemoglobin A1C, in my opinion, are the two biggest markers for metabolic health. Okay, if you get your hemoglobin A1C in the very low range of healthy, like I think around like 4 might be a good place for the average person to shoot on hemoglobin A1C. And I would say for triglycerides, you probably want your triglycerides below 80. Okay. But I think like 100 is like the top end of the healthy for me personally. Mainstream reference ranges are going to be like 150 and below is like supposedly the healthy range. But I think under 80 is ideal. And my clients that have reverse metabolic syndrome and then restored their health and vitality, typically you'll see the greatest vitality with their hemoglobin A1C under 4.5 and triglycerides under 80. Okay, so let's see. And I've seen triglycerides like super low, like 50 nanograms per deciliter, but those are on clients that are on keto and fasting. So let's see. So after that would be HDL. So if you have your hemoglobin A1C under 4.5, preferably around 4, and then you have your triglycerides under 80, you're already doing pretty well, okay? Those are direct reflection of how your body is using energy, okay? If you have too much energy too many carbohydrates, okay, too many high glycemic load carbohydrates to the point where your hemoglobin A1C is going off the chart and your triglycerides are high, that means you have a lot of energy substrates floating around in the bloodstream. And these are prone to a dangerously high creation of reactive oxygen species and these other oxidative compounds, oxidative byproducts, things like advanced glycation end products, things like oxidizing cholesterol and lipid peroxides, and a wide variety of reactive oxygen type byproducts, things that create damage throughout the body. Okay, trying to keep this real simple here. And that's the main, in my opinion, the main cause of disease is having these excessive energy substrates floating around the body. Too much triglycerides in the blood, probably the main risk factor for heart disease, in my opinion. Too much blood sugar floating around. That's hopefully you'll piss that shit out. But anyway, sorry guys. So HDL cholesterol, okay, HDL. So high density lipoprotein is not actually cholesterol. Okay, it is a lipoprotein. It's a protein. It's a fatty acid. It's fat mixed with protein, whatever. And it's basically a boat that flows through your blood and carries around different nutrients and shuttles it in and out of cells, things of that nature. There's a lot of different ideas on what HDL actually is, but the best way to look at HDL is that it's a proxy. It is a indicator of metabolic health. It's not there's no causal link between any of these things really, but especially HDL and LDL. It's just an indicator of different molecules that are in your body at a certain time. You probably want your HDL within anywhere from 40 to 80 nanograms per deciliter, but I would say anything 50 to 80 nanograms per deciliter is probably ideal. So there's some studies that have tried to debunk this. They basically put people on HDL increasing drugs, and they artificially increase their HDL to see if there's any health benefits, and they find no health benefits from taking HDL increasing drugs. But the problem is that, again, HDL is not a causal factor. Just because you boost HDL in the blood or you decrease LDL in the blood, it's not going to cause like certain health outcomes, because it is a number on paper. It is an indicator of what's going on in your body. So we shouldn't be like trying to artificially like change HDL and LDL. They're not causal things. But instead, we should look at people who have like certain markers of HDL in their blood, and then what health outcomes does that imply. And what we can see from the data, especially Framingham, everybody already knows, is where a lot of this HDL stuff comes from. Essentially, people who have in between 50 to 80 nanograms per deciliter of HDL tend to have best heart health outcomes independent of LDL cholesterol. So, personally, I think that that's a huge thing to look at. So HDL is basically an indicator of your metabolic health. And pretty much all of these things mentioned so far are indicators of your metabolic health, your insulin sensitivity, how your body is using energy and blood sugar, etc. And a little bit more on that, I think LDL is an indicator of mobilizing fat for energy, is what I believe, which is why it goes up during certain times where your body is mobilizing fat for energy. Anyway, so if you're paying attention to hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, and then you get an insulin sensitivity test, which is even better, then I think overall those are the main things you need to worry about as far as preventing the primary contributors to most diseases, okay? So everything from like vision loss to, liver issues, heart disease, cancer even. I believe all these things are mostly related to insulin sensitivity. And I've seen countless testimonials of people who have gone on either ketogenic diets and reversed cancer or put their cancer in remission. I've seen people who go on like raw vegan diets and they reverse cancer. And I made videos where I talk about why I think that can be achieved through these complete opposite diets. The raw vegans will say, you reverse cancer because of an alkaline state you put your body into, but I don't think so. The ketogenic people will be like, oh, it's because cancer is caused by sugar. What I really think, I think it's that cancer, not all cancers, but a lot of cancers are caused by insulin resistance. I think others are caused by hormonal issues. But the main cause deep down inside of a lot of cancers is too much reactive oxygen species damaging a certain part of the body. Like when you smoke cigarettes, you get cancer in certain parts of the body that are irritated by the cigarette smoke. Your respiratory system, your throat, etc. That's reactive oxygen damage in play, as oxidative damage in play. And antioxidants don't seem to help that, but in regards to, like, for example, I have an interview with one of my friends who put his leukemia into remission, eating like really cheap ground turkey, conventional eggs, and like broccoli or something. And he did lose a lot of body fat too, but the kind of cancer that he had was like said to be like pretty severe or whatever. Anyway, he put in a remission on a ketogenic diet, eating like the cheapest food. And so he did lose a lot of weight, and nothing the doctors were doing were helping until he put himself on that diet. But what I think is causing these cancers is insulin sensitivity in a lot of cases. It's insulin resistance. And so when you go on a raw vegan diet, you're malnourishing yourself so much that your body becomes very sensitive to whatever energy is taking in. Obviously, the cancer is not going to be able to grow if you take off its food source. I don't think it has anything to do with alkalinity. And the ketogenic diet's the same thing. You know, people talk about autophagy, right, and fasting and shit like that. Well, you remove carbohydrates from your diet, your body's going to be in a severe state of like basically trying to uptake any carbohydrate substances it possibly can get. And that's going to put a pretty big dent in cancer. But anyway, for more information on this idea of cancer, look into Professor Thomas Seyfried, I believe is his name. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, Thomas Seyfried. And also look into Otto Warburg. Okay, these are branching off the same kind of theory. So yeah, I think that's insulin sensitivity is the main driver for that. And then for heart disease, you can look at the Great Cholesterol Myth by Dr. What was his name? Fuck, how can I forget his? Oh, Johnny Bowden. Dr. Johnny Bowden and Dr. Sinatra. Okay, that's a good book that breaks it down in real simple terms and doesn't overwhelm your brain with like jargon. Then there's another one by Ufi Ravensnoff. Can't pronounce his name right, but he has written many textbooks on cholesterol not causing cancer and explaining the real cause, and has pioneered many meta-analysis directly challenging statin drug companies. And by the way, it's the statin drug companies and the grain industry, but mostly statin drug companies, that really want you to believe it's cholesterol. Grain industry wants you to think cholesterol causes heart disease because they can sell margarine created from the byproducts of their grain production, and they can label it heart healthy because it has no effect on your cholesterol, because the only thing that raises blood cholesterol is really saturated fat, or that's the main thing. So they can sell you these cholesterol-free, saturated fat-free margarines that can lower cholesterol, and they can label it as heart healthy, and they can have the American Heart Association label on it, because as long as people think cholesterol causes heart disease, cholesterol-free products can be labeled fucking heart healthy. So the grain industry will lose a lot of profit if people believe that there's no benefit to eating their fucking artificially created grain butter, basically. Soybean oil bullshit. Same thing with cereals. Has anyone ever looked at cereal boxes when they go down the cereal aisle full of sugar and just like empty carbohydrate calories, and they just fortify it with a bunch of vitamins and minerals, and then they have a heart healthy label on it? Like, do you really think Frosted Flakes are like heart healthy and going to like help you prevent heart disease? I mean, really, like just like freaking grain flakes frosted with refined sugar and added vegetable oils. Like, do you really think that shit's good for you? It just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, these are the companies that are funding the research that cholesterol and saturated fat causes heart disease. If insulin resistance was thought of as a cause of heart disease, a lot of consumers would think twice before eating a bunch of cereal. Trust me. People would be like, oh shit, like, you mean diabetes, or insulin resistance, like that causes heart disease? Maybe I should limit my carbs a little bit. Most consumers are going to assume that carbs themselves cause diabetes, which if diabetes causes heart disease, they're going to avoid the freaking cereals at all costs, probably. Statin drug companies want you to think that cholesterol and saturated fat causes heart disease, because as long as we believe that high LDL cholesterol is a causal factor in heart disease, they can keep selling you LDL cholesterol lowering drugs. So there's a huge financial incentive for these companies to fund research and make you believe that LDL cholesterol is a causal link. And there's a huge incentive for them to suppress information that insulin resistance could be driving these problems. Dementia as well. Dementia and Alzheimer's disease seem to be caused by insulin resistance in the brain. That I posted multiple studies talking about this and demonstrating this. There's some pretty strong evidence that that's the case. But of course you don't hear this talked about very often in the mainstream health communities. So yeah, I mean, this is why I think insulin resistance is number one, and these are the health markers you should look at. So alternatively, so beyond that, we have nutrient deficiencies, and there are certain blood tests you can take, like for B12 and folate. You can get an anemia panel, but you got to have a really good doctor to interpret those results for you, because they might just think, oh, as long as it's in a healthy range, everything's good. But no, you got to look at the different individual metrics in the anemia panel, and how high are they to the top end of healthy compared to lower, compared to other metrics in that anemia panel, so that you can rule out maybe some subtle or minor vitamin deficiencies versus actual full-fledged clinical anemia. That's kind of like the method of figuring out B12 deficiency. Just measuring it in the blood is not necessarily effective. We want to know how it's affecting the blood and everything. We want to know how your blood cell counts and things like that. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, you know, vitamin deficiencies are a big thing. Protein deficiency, and when I say protein deficiency, I'm just talking about people who eat under the optimal amount of protein. And this is not based in, you know, mainstream science or anything like that. I mean, yeah, sure, there's a lot of science on bodybuilding and other things. There's not a lot of direct science on protein and amino acid and like the general population, because most people think of protein in the context of muscle building. But what I can say is that high protein diets tend to improve mental health issues. They tend to improve glycemic control. They tend to improve most metrics of health, and muscle mass, grip strength, and a wide variety of other protein dependent factors have been constantly demonstrated to be the main predictor of longevity into old age. Okay. You have less hip fractures, you have more robust and healthy disease-free life living into older age when you're eating adequate protein and you are strong and vigorous. So eating adequate protein, like your dietary protein intake, in my opinion, should be an independent health marker. But I'll have to make a whole nother video about that one, because I don't think we have enough time to go deep into that in this video. It'd be way too long. But yeah, protein intake is going to modify a variety of other factors. Your homocysteine level is going to be a good indicator of your nutrient status. If you have high homocysteine, that indicates a B12, folate, and or choline deficiency. And obviously, it's very simple to correct that. All you got to do is stop eating isolated proteins that give you the precursors to homocysteine. Things like whey protein, egg white, and stupid shit like that. Instead, eat the egg yolk, because it contains B12, folate, and choline needed to convert homocysteine and glutathione, your body's master antioxidant. You know, eat red meat, etc., etc. I don't want to go too deep in that. But yeah, high homocysteine basically means you're taking in too many isolated proteins and not getting enough B12, folate, and other nutrients. So yeah, I generally just say, hey, look, you can use Chronometer to measure your daily dietary intake of vitamins and minerals, but know that if most of your nutrition comes from plant foods, what you see on paper is not what you're absorbing. But if you get most of your nutrients in Chronometer from animal foods, those animal-based nutrients, there's a much higher likelihood you're actually absorbing them. You can't just look at the food I'm eating, the nutrient facts of those foods over the course of the day, and base your nutrient adequacy on that. It doesn't work. Because bioavailability affects the amount that you're absorbing, and a lot of people have digestive problems where they're not even digesting a lot of those plant foods that they're eating. So that brings me to the next point is, so after the metabolic health and after the protein intake is established, 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight minimum, and I think more is better if it's coming from whole animal foods, because that's where you get most of your nutrition from. Especially to prevent things like high homocysteine and a lack of endogenous antioxidant production, and also to give your body the cofactors it needs to produce ATP, things like creatine and carnitine found in red meat, and neurotransmitters are dependent on these things as well. And as I've made videos about, in plant-based advocates, they seem to have collagen deficiency symptoms. Beyond that, we want to rule out food intolerances. So that's the last piece of this puzzle, is food intolerances. So if you have digestive problems, your butt's like a solid shooter, you need to remove certain foods that you think are triggering that. And almost always it's going to start with whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds. Those are the most common contributors to things like Crohn's disease, colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, diverticulitis, and the list goes on. You want to first remove those foods, going on a strict red meat, cooked vegetable, and fruit diet. And if you're still experiencing symptoms, rule out FODMAPs, and then look at the vegetable intake. Now, some people might have like what they call fructose malabsorption, but I think for most people these things are rare. But it's very important to go on a calculated elimination diet if you're experiencing autoimmune symptoms or if you're experiencing digestive issues. Because for me, my IBS, my psoriasis was directly caused by these whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. And just because you have an individual intolerance to a food doesn't make that food unhealthy. It just means that, your body, for whatever reason, is rejecting it. So, and these are very common too. It's not just like, oh, bread is bad for you, or oh, gluten. No, it's like, your body's reacting to certain foods, and it's definitely not a gimmick or a trend. It's real shit. So those are the most important things that we can look at from like a baseline foundational perspective. If you cover all those areas, you won't really need to worry about what the new health guru says. Dr. Stephen Gundry, you don't need to worry about what he says. Freaking Dave Asprey, you don't need to worry about what he says. You don't need to worry about, what's the other guy, Simlad or whatever the hell. Dr. freaking Berg, seriously, you don't need to worry about these people. You don't need to listen to these crazy gurus like freaking, who are some other ones? Like, you hear all these raw vegan gurus and shit like that. But like Mark Hyman, which I've been a big fan of Mark Hyman for so long, but Dr. Josh Axe, so you don't need to like worry too much about a lot of these people and some of their crazy things they might say. You don't need to worry about pesticides and herbicides and freaking even artificial sweeteners and flavorings, unless you have an individual intolerance to those things. You don't need to worry about EMFs like Frank Tufano will go crazy about. You don't need to worry about these things. You just need to worry about the biggest picture problems, okay? Like the biggest, most bang for your buck indicators, okay? These days, I guess that's pretty much my main approach to all these things. I'm a big fan of efficiency. I'm a big fan of like what's the most obvious, biggest, simple, most effective method for doing something. Because I find it's extremely common for people to like overcomplicate everything in the health community. Okay, this goes for self-development. This goes for physical training as well. Like people just want to like live in a fantasy land where they just they dream and visualize and overanalyze all these things, and they completely miss the most basic important things. Okay. And these are the most important things as far as like disease prevention and like healing certain conditions. Now, obviously, there's other things like viral infections and possible parasite infections, but a lot of people self-diagnose themselves with like adrenal fatigue, self-diagnose themselves with some crazy syndrome that doesn't actually imply an actual cause, just like a label they slap on shit. Or they self-diagnose themselves with like candida or parasite infection, and like in reality, they probably just have a food intolerance. Or in reality, they're probably just eating too many refined carbs. Or maybe they're not getting enough sleep or something. Or they're taking a supplement that's actually causing the very symptoms they're trying to avoid. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've like spent $100 on supplements that are actually causing the very problems that I think are caused by a disease or whatever, that I'm trying to treat with those supplements. Like, oh, I feel so tired all the time, and yet I'm taking like rhodiola and ashwagandha, which actually tend to make me tired. And then I remove those, I'm like, oh fuck, those supplements that I thought were going to give me energy were making me tired this whole fucking time. Who would have thought? Or like, oh, those prebiotic supplements have been, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm going to reverse my digestive issues with probiotics and prebiotics. And then I realized, oh shit, like when I don't take them, my digestive symptoms go away. Wow, like the very thing I was trying to treat my symptoms with was actually causing my fucking symptoms. And I've had clients that were taking like licorice tea or like ginger tea or dandelion tea, you know, these things that they think are going to cleanse their body or do something like magical, and they're suffering from like dehydration and constant urination and like insomnia. And I look at their food log and I see these things. I'm like, hey, you should probably remove the dandelion tea or the ginger tea or the nettle leaf tea or whatever, because that tends to cause frequent urination. And then they remove that, and then all of a sudden, oh my god, like I can sleep better, I don't pee anymore, I feel more energized because my body's actually holding on to water now. Another one is like, and this is really common with my clients, is you know, they'll complain about digestive problems, like irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, right? And I look at their food log, and they start every day with like this giant smoothie. Like without fail, this is really common. It's like a kale smoothie with like chia seeds and flax seeds and shit like that. And I'm like, hey, you know, most of those things are undigestible, and it's very common for people to just like shit them out undigested within hours of consumption. Maybe you should try removing that and see if your symptoms go away. Next thing you know, literally after like 3 days, they messaged me with all this joy about how their chronic diarrhea symptoms went away when they removed the freaking nut smoothie that they were taking in the morning, or the kale smoothie. And it's like, wow, like these very simple changes like are all you freaking needed. Meanwhile, they're spending years and years going through the ringer of like YouTube health. And in doctors too. Doctors don't know. They're like, oh, I'll give you this medication that like shuts off your fucking colon from working or something like. And then these like YouTube people will be like, oh, it's a candida. You need a candida cleanse. And it's like, that's the exact thing you don't need. It's like, that's the problem is you're, you know. So yeah, health is really simple. And unfortunately, most people aren't even going to have enough attention span to make it to the end of this video and get the value out of it. So leave your question and comments down below. Hey, let me know, did you watch this whole video? Are you one of the very rare humans who actually can pay attention and focus on like one video at a time without like skipping through the fucking recommended videos and shit that YouTube is like hijacking your brain with? Let me know in the comments if you're one of those few humans who can actually fucking focus. And I'll talk to y'all very soon.